This is the Coaching Life Podcast, episode number 78. And today, Pat and I are going to begin a conversation about what it means to be a great teammate. What does it look like to be a great teammate? You know, when we talk on this podcast, we understand that the people that we're speaking to can be rather diverse. We could be talking to parents, we could be talking to coaches, or we could be talking to players. Everyone who listens to us, we believe, needs to understand what it looks like and what it means to be a great teammate. And this is a conversation that we're probably going to continue over the next several weeks during the month of December. We decided that we would take some time to just outline a number of ways that people can be great teammates. And that's whatever team that you might be on. You might be on a sports team, or you might be on a team that you work with. These are all going to be relevant to you regardless if you're a parent or a coach or a player or just someone who wants to know how to get better and be the best you can be wherever it is that you work and participate with a group of people. And so we hope that you will enjoy this episode, and we hope that you will share it and pass it along to friends and family. And we hope that, of course, you will subscribe and listen to us every week on the Coaching Life Podcast. Let's get started. Well, here we are in the Coaching Life again. My name is Chris Stewart. I'm with my good buddy, Pat Martin. How you doing tonight, Pat?
Hey, Coach. Doing well.
We're on a Sunday night again. We're recording on a Sunday night. You, however, might be listening on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday, a morning, an afternoon, an evening, whenever you might listen. We don't care when you listen as long as you do, right?
That's right.
So regardless, we welcome you to the Coaching Life Podcast.
Welcome indeed. I would assume most listeners just cannot wait. And they listen first thing Monday morning.
Yeah, people probably can't even sleep. I'm guessing people can't even sleep on Sunday night. Or when that alarm hits in the morning, their head pops off the pillow. And
before the alarm.
They wake up and they're like, I'm checking my app right now. Spotify, you better have the Coaching Life Podcast on Monday morning, because that's my juice, man. That's my juice for the week.
And they're making their bed as we come on.
Yes.
As we're welcoming.
That's right.
Right now, they're going to be making their bed.
The headphones go in the ears. They brush their teeth. They turn us on. They're making their bed, and they're getting better. They're ready to roll. They're passing it on to their kids. They're saying, listen, kid, on your way to school. Well, I don't know. Are they going to school? Or I don't know. What are they doing?
As you're logging into your machine.
Yes, as you're logging into your virtual school, they're saying, hey, on one ear, you better be listening to Pat and Chris on the Coaching Life Podcast while you listen to Mr. Kennedy teaching math, right? But no, Pat, last week we talked about a pretty serious topic, and we got some comments. I don't know if you had talked to anyone after last week's episode went live or not, but I had a couple people reach out to me, and then the folks that I work out with on Wednesday nights. Of course, last week I worked out with them on Tuesday night, being Thanksgiving week, doing some baseball lessons down there at the Baseline facility. I've had people comment and say, man, that was a pretty deep episode that you guys did. That was pretty intense. There were some moments that were a little bit intense, and it was good. And one of the things that we talked about was, we talked about this story of a guy named George Biordi, who was a lacrosse player on the Cornell lacrosse team back in the early 2000s. And he was what you would consider to be the ultimate teammate. I mean, just the ultimate athlete, the ultimate teammate, but also a very humble man who did not necessarily seek the spotlight, but he gained the spotlight just by example, by the way that he played, by the way he carried himself, and just by the way he led. And there was if you want to hear the whole story, you can go back and listen to last week. But just to paraphrase, he was in a game in his senior year of college where they should have been beating this team by a large margin, but it was actually a close game, and he was just giving his all like he always did. And someone had made a pass, the opponent made a pass that was coming his direction. He played defense, and he jumped in front of the pass and blocked it, a lacrosse ball. He blocked it with his chest. And when the ball hit him in the chest, he went down and he started to convulse on the ground. and he was unconscious, and they couldn't revive him. Basically, he died instantly. And something that took place after that happened was the Cornell lacrosse team and many of his teammates and the parents and the family members of those teammates and the coaches, of course, they put together a foundation in honor of George Biordi. And the name of this foundation was called the 21 Foundation. It was a scholarship. And they had every year, on an annual basis, they had a 21 dinner in New York City. And every year, and this continues to this day, hundreds of teammates, hundreds of people who played for Cornell University come to this dinner, and it's a big ordeal, and they raise funds for this scholarship in honor of George Biordi. And you and I talked last week about how his teammates put together this list of ways that he was a great teammate, that he was the ideal teammate. And one of the things that Cornell University did even before George died was they had a hard hat that they would use as sort of their symbol of a person who represents what it means to be a great teammate. And every week they would award somebody with this hard hat. And then after George died, they created a patch that they all wore on their uniforms with a red hard hat and the white number 21. And that was a number that George wore, number 21. Well, John Gordon, one of my favorite authors in the world, who wrote The Energy Bus and The Carpenter and The Positive Dog and all these books that I love to read. They're just little short parables that you can read in a day. He picked up this story, and he learned of George Biordi, and he attended this dinner in New York City for the 21 Foundation. And he interviewed and spoke to many of George's teammates and his coaches. And in doing so, he, of course, compiled his story. And he wrote a book called The Hard Hat. And in The Hard Hat, he listed the 21 ways to be a great teammate. And I think that one of the things that would be really beneficial on this podcast, and I actually can't believe that we haven't done this until now. We're 78 episodes in, and we've not yet thought to have an episode or a series of episodes, rather, talking about what it means, what it looks like to be a great teammate. I mean, that's what this podcast is about, you know. And,
absolutely, yeah,
yeah. I mean, I think we could take some time, you know, maybe throughout this month of December, and just talk about what it means to be a great teammate. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds good to me. I think a lot of times the answer isn't as simple as what people might think.
Right.
And in other ways, it is fairly simple. So I guess we'll get a chance to elaborate on that as we go. But,
sure.
Something that, I would say that we haven't completely left out, the need or the aspiration of being a good teammate, because we've talked about it before about, in certain instances, especially like, what type of person a college coach is looking for. Yeah. And they'll see, they want to see what kind of teammate you are, and they want good teammates. College coaches want good teammates in their program. It's something that they desire to have. It's type of player that they want. And if you're not a good teammate, that would be a knock on you. So I'm sure we've talked about it in other ways along the way, but we've never really specifically focused on some things that you could do as a player. And I would say this too, this relates heavily to players, but it also relates to parents that have young athletes, so that, so often, Coach, we, as parents, we focus so much on the swinging and the throwing and the dribbling and the running, and we don't focus
aspects.
on and these what you might call intangible skills
Right.
or intangible assets, we don't spend a whole lot of time on encouraging or developing. And they're just like anything else. I think you need to spend that time developing them just as you would, your fastball or your jumper.
Yeah, no doubt.
So this is going to be good stuff.
It's going to be good stuff and pragmatic. I mean, it's going to be very, very practical because it's if you're looking for, a handful of episodes where you can kind of bookmark them and say, hey, there's a list of things here. There are things that I can actually sit down and take notes with. And we would encourage you to, if you're not driving, of course, if you're listening to this and sitting down or you're sitting out on the porch or the deck and you're enjoying it. Of course, it might be snowing when you're listening to this. If you're listening in Ohio, it's going to snow the next couple of days. We might get some Christmas snow, buddy.
Maybe it'll be a rough winter for viruses. Huh?
Hopefully so.
That's what I'm rooting for.
I'm rooting for that as well.
Coach, I hate snow. I'm not a big Christmas fan, so winter isn't my thing. I'll get behind winter if somehow it can shoo away all the sickness that we're
big amen
that we're fighting or the
big amen
we're
to that.
Worried about.
Right. So in whatever way you're listening, we think that this is going to be really practical for you. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a confession isn't the right word, but I'll tell you that I've talked about this before. I've used these things before. When I was coaching the Athens high school baseball team, it would have been Brock's senior year, so it was 2017. Was the winter of that year was when I read this book by John Gordon, The Hard Hat. And I remember where I actually read it on an airplane on a flight to Connecticut, and then I finished it on the flight back. I was going up to my cousin's wedding in Connecticut, and it was a memorable time because one, it was a really cool wedding. It was at a bed and breakfast, and it was just right after my uncle had died and things like that. So it was very memorable. But this book was incredible. I mean, it really struck me. And the first thing I did when we got back was I took out a journal and I started writing down how I could use what I had just read in this book. Yeah. And so immediately, I gathered, and this was in February, I gathered all of our seniors that year, there were 11 of them. I gathered them together and we met in the same room. And I said, guys, I want to tell you a story. And I told them the story of George Biordi. And I said, there are in this book, in John Gordon's book, The Hard Hat, he lists 21 ways that George exemplified what it meant to be a great teammate. I have put all 21 of these ways on slips of paper and placed them in this hat. And I was shaking this hat up in front of them. I want all of you to pick one of these. You're going to draw one out of the hat. Now that we only had 11 seniors. And so, of course, some of them, 10 of them were left out. I mean, 10 of the 21 ways. But they all drew one out. And so they all got their slip of paper. They're looking at it. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to research that way to be a great teammate. I want you to take a couple of weeks to research it because our first week of practice is, February 23rd, whenever it was. And I said, at the end of practice every night for that first 2 weeks, we are going to have a team meeting at the end of practice, and each one of you are going to give a presentation. You can do a PowerPoint, however you want to do it, but you're going to give a presentation on what it means to be a great teammate. And I tell you what, these guys really embraced it, and it was. And I would encourage, if you coaches out there that are listening, this is a great way. These kinds of things are great ways to engage your teammates, your players into into the mental aspect of what the game is about. And look for these kinds of ways. John Gordon wrote a book called The Pyramid of Success, and there are tons of things, little building blocks of success that you could just take and give to each one of your players and say, here, tell us about this building block at the end of practice, and you utilize those things. Take 10 minutes at the end of practice and do those kinds of things. And it was really meaningful. It was a really cool thing. And a lot of these players still remember, even to this day, what their topic was that they presented to the team. Is a really cool
That's
thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's a culture thing. We talk about culture all the time. And, culture is one of those things that you're like, well, a lot of people, well, how do I do this in 4 years? How do I get a freshman and incorporate him or her into a program culture, a team culture? And that's this is a great example of one way to do it. So thanks for sharing that with us, Coach.
You betcha. And I'll tell you, and this is getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but the one that sticks out to me more than any was all throughout that year. One of the things that we kept hearing our players say at the end of games, as we were, we shook hands, we got back in the dugout at the end of the game before we left to get back on the bus. Say it's an away game. You always heard our players say, "Hey guys, leave the place better than we found it. Leave the dugout better than we found it." So whether it's a locker room, a dugout, a field, whatever it is, leave it better than you found it. And that's actually one of the points of being a great teammate, which we'll get to eventually. But George Boiardi was one who would stay later than anyone else to make sure that everything was picked up. Everything looked good. That when he left the locker room, it was in better shape than it was when he got there. And that's one of the points. It was really cool to see our guys just embrace that and say, you know what, we're going to take pride in making this dugout spick and span before we leave it. Every place we go.
Yeah,
loved it.
That's awesome. Yeah, people out there probably, or especially young players, are probably thinking, if they're listening, how does that make me any better of a player?
It's very possible.
Right? At least some of them.
I know about 14 guys that are going to find out here this summer. If you're playing for the Baseline Blaze, buddy, you're going to find out how this kind of stuff makes you a better player.
Well, that's why you want to play for it.
That's exactly why you want to play for us. That's right. Well, let's get into it.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna cover a couple maybe.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
We'll see what we can do.
2 or 3.
So I guess I'll drop one. Is that what you want me to do?
Drop it. What's the first one we're going to talk about?
Oh, yeah. Sweat more. First rule, sweat more.
What do you mean by that?
Exactly. Exactly. As a matter of fact, when you brought it up to me, I even questioned it. I was like, are you sure it's sweat more?
Sweat? Yeah, right. Else? What are you talking about? Sweat more.
But you know what? You know what I thought of when I saw this? I thought of Jocko Willink.
Oh my gosh, yes. His tweets every morning. Yes.
Every morning. And this is true. And everyone out there can look this up. You go into Twitter, you look up Jocko. Every morning at 4:30 a.m. almost on the dot daily.
Somewhere between 4:15 and 4:30, yeah.
Yeah. He takes a picture, and usually it's of his gym floor.
Yep.
And he's saying something like push through, or the workout got me today, or whatever it is. But on that gym floor, you see a big puddle of sweat.
Aftermath.
It's kind of gross.
Aftermath.
Yeah. Right. Hashtag aftermath.
That's right.
That's what I thought of. And it kind of led me back to, when I was doing some CrossFit training.
Yeah.
And I realized in these workouts, there's kind of 2 feelings that happen. At least this was my personal experience. One, I'd either sweat really bad, like just sweat all over. And I'm not the type of person to do that. But when you're doing these workouts and it's nonstop for 45 minutes, your body learns how to do it. Trust me. So it's either sweat real bad or just absolutely feel horrible at the end of the workout. So much that I'm just laying on the floor. Yeah. Almost unable to move, breathing as much oxygen as I can into my body, hoping I'm not going to roll over and throw up. But what I think about that is they were 2 physical indicators that told me I was doing something.
Right.
It told me I was doing something. I think, when John Gordon is saying sweat more, I mean, obviously he's saying work harder, right? But a lot of times people out there say, well, I'm working as hard as I can. What do I need to do to work harder? And I think that's a good question.
No doubt. Yeah, in the weight room, he interviewed a couple of George's teammates, and he said one of the teammates said that he often got paired up with George in the weight room, and he hated it because let's say he's doing bench presses, and every time George leaned over to spot him on the bench press, he said he's just dripping sweat all over his face. And he's like, George, back up, man. He's like, this dude is just sweating like crazy, Another one of his teammates, he said he told a story about how they were practicing one night in February, and it was so cold that the turf was frozen over, like it was frosty on the turf. And he said they were all just kind of doing their best to just ignore how cold it was. And after some of their pre-practice, I guess they do like some stick work and pre-practice, warm-up things and things like that. The coach would bring them all together and they would talk to them in sort of a huddle. And he said he's standing there and all of his teammates are standing there and they're all kind of like freezing to death. They're just hoping that they could get moving again so that they don't freeze to death. And he said, standing in front of me, right in front of me is George. And he said, I looked at this dude, and I'm looking at his back. And he said, he is sweating through his jersey. I could see sweat already on his jersey. And he said, I looked at the back of his head and he's got sweat. His hair is sweaty and he's got little icicles forming at the bottom, at the tips of his hair. And he thought to himself, how on earth is this guy already sweating like that? And the point of that is, that's what good teammates do. They work harder than everybody else on the team.
Mm. Yeah. I feel like we're going to hear a lot of good stories as we go through this. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah.
But, I would go back and say, you're still going to have those people, coach, that are saying, I'm giving all that I can, I'm working as hard as I can. And I think if you had asked George's teammates, what made him work harder? What made him do these, what made him exemplify these 21 things that they picked out as the rules to being a good teammate? I think what they would tell you or get around telling you in some sort of way is that he cared. He cared more, and Jon Gordon actually has a website, jongordon.com, and he does a weekly newsletter on that website. Yeah. And one of the weekly newsletters was titled Care More. Yeah. And it's, it's just a weekly tidbit of, this is a way to kind of improve yourself, the next day, care more. And the illustration that he gives is so perfect, because I think sometimes when we're young athletes, we minimize the importance of the small things, right? We've talked about making our bed. John Wooden talks about the importance of tying your shoes right, because everything starts from the shoes up. And Jon Gordon told this story about a barber that when a young lady comes into his barbershop and he's going to cut her hair, he imagines that young lady is his granddaughter. Or when a man comes in to get his hair cut, he imagines that man is his son, or an elder lady is his grandmother. And the idea behind that is, if he envisions these people that he loves and that that obviously he cares about, there's the key word, care. He's gonna do a better job, because he's gonna put more focus and more effort into doing what he's doing. And in this case, we're talking about cutting hair, which is I have no clue how people cut hair. I think you have to be born with the skill. I don't know how you could ever learn that, but it's not physically exhausting cutting hair, right? It's not something that you exert a lot of energy doing. It's not something you probably would sweat a lot doing, but it's something that fits in that category of, a task like this. Sweat more, care more about the little things. And that's how you're doing it to the fullest of your ability. Because when we minimize things, when we minimize their importance, regardless of whether we're breaking a sweat, maybe we wouldn't sweat all that much. Maybe some people don't sweat all that much. You know what I mean? Some people don't. But knowing that they care,
right,
could give them that idea and give them that assurance that they're doing what they need to do to get better for themselves and for their teammates.
Yeah, and they're taking pride in what they do, and therefore they're giving the absolute best effort that they possibly can give. And I think that's the point of sweating more. is that you just absolutely give the best effort that you can give. I'm a believer that I think young players these days today, and really maybe, I don't know, maybe generations ago, who knows? It might not just be the players these days. You know, people listen to if younger kids listen to this, they're probably like, oh, I hear these old guys talking about players these days. But I really think that players often don't know what it feels like to go to the brink of full exhaustion. Like they really don't know what it feels like to take your body to that limit, to where if I go one more rep, I'm going to puke. I'm going to pass out. And I think that sometimes we give up a little too soon, assuming that we've gone that full exertion. You know, when a guy named David Goggins would say, dude, you've only given 40%. Your body has a lot more in it. You know, Navy SEALs motto. Yeah. And that's what Sweatmore is.
Absolutely.
No doubt. Number 2, remember, well done is better than well said. Well done is better than well said. This is probably one of the things that was spoken of in regards to George and his character, who he was more than anything else. And that was, you know, some people lead by their charisma. Some people are leaders because they just speak really well. They know how to say the right things. And other people may not have the words, but you just want to follow them. I mean, you see the way they work. You see what they do. And you're like, man, there's something about that guy. You know, I just want to follow him. I want to be like him. And that was George. Well done is better than well said.
Yeah, and the neat thing about that is at least as far as I know, that's a quote that came from Benjamin Franklin.
Yes, it is.
And it was one of George Biardi's favorite quotes. Mm-hmm. And what makes it so neat,
he had a little paperweight that had that quote on it. I think we talked about that last week. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's so neat about it is it was his favorite quote, but that's exactly how his teammates saw him.
Right.
Like when they think of him, they thought, yeah, this is his favorite quote, but this is exactly who he is. This is how he lives his life. He does things the right way. Right?
Yeah.
Well done. He does it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, and they may not have even known, who knows, they may not have even known that was Benjamin Franklin's quote. They might have just said, hey, George lived this, this is his motto, and that's who he was. And it wouldn't, you may not even attribute it to someone, as being a famous quote. You might just say, yeah, that characterizes him. That's my guy. Absolutely. That's George. That's who he was. And to say that is, and we should probably say this, there's nothing wrong with words. In fact, you should lead with words as well, verbally.
Yep. But communication, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Have great communication, and being a good leader is part of that is having great communication and knowing how to say the right things, when to say the right things. We need an inspiring message sometimes. We need someone to stand before us and say, guys, here's what we got to do. And that inspires us. But sometimes, I guess I should say most of the time, what we need is someone that shows us how to do it the right way. Someone who we can look to and say, okay, that's how it should be done. Right there.
Lead by example.
Yeah, I can't always explain it. I can't put it into words, but when you look at the way he operates, when you look at the way he practices, when you look at the effort he gives, when you look at how he goes about his business, that's it. That's it. That's what it means to be a great teammate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a good point. You know it when you see it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Sometimes when the culture isn't great in a program, some players will be turned off by this type of player. They'll kind of be not feel good about it because they're and ultimately the reason they don't feel good about it is because they're not doing it better than how they're saying.
That kind of player makes you feel guilty. Yeah,
absolutely. Right. Yeah. So it's just one of those things that it builds on one another. But I think the key for me coming out of that is there's in the world of information technology systems, there's usually this concept of a driving component that everything else kind of leads, thrives off of. So my example would be, maybe when you go to, I don't have a great example that most people would understand. I don't think, because I'm such a nerd that whatever I said right now is not going to be translated well. But there's a master component to every system. Okay. And that component drives everything else. Everything else gets its information from that system. Yeah. Everything else gets its energy from that system, gets its orders from that system. Everything else knows what to do because of that system. And that system, as an athlete or as a coach or as a person, needs to be doing things well, needs to be doing things the right way. Because if you allow the saying part, if you allow the talking part to be the master, that's when you get off course. That's when you're not going in the right direction. So if you're doing the things the right way, everything else kind of follows. I guess that's where I was getting at.
Yeah, the reason we say well done is better than well said is because you can say the right things, but if you're not doing them, if you're not doing the right things, then no one's going to follow.
Sure.
You're going to have a hard time.
That's where the cliche.
Yeah.
Good.
No, that's just it. That's all.
Well, and it's hard to do rather than say, right? That's where the cliche comes from. Easier said than done.
Right.
Because the doing
it's
is
easier
the hard
said.
part.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have to figure out a process. We have to figure out a mindset, a focus that allows us to do those things we need to do consistently and well.
Yeah.
And when we find that, it'll begin to impact those people around us, not just ourselves, but it'll begin to impact our teams, right? Yeah. I oddly enough, I really wasn't thinking about our podcast when I did this morning, but after church, after I watched a couple church services on the internet, Bradbury Church of Christ and Oasis, two good services this morning. Thank you guys for that. I tweeted this. I said, we as people, we kind of collect teams. We kind of, as we grow older, we become part of more and more teams as we go. And it's the first time I've ever really thought about that. Like I've always been thought you always have one team, but you always have multiple teams, right? You have family teams, you have religious teams, athletic teams, scholastic teams, social teams. You have all these different teams.
Work teams. Yeah.
Yeah, work teams, right? I didn't even use work teams, but the question I posed was, what are you doing today to make your team better? Yeah. So it kind of comes back around to these 21 things, and I definitely think that leading by example, doing the right things the right way, is a great focus for a young athlete and coaches. As they go into any sport or any season.
Yeah, if you're an athlete and you want your teammates to hear you, to listen to you, if you really want to be a leader, you aspire to be a leader. Maybe you aspire to be a captain on your team. If you want them to listen to you when you speak, they're going to listen more likely because you have earned their respect by what you have communicated with your actions. And that's what we mean by well done is better than well said.
And here's the thing. If you talk a lot and you're not showing the actions, you're not doing the things that you need to do, right? No, I'm not even talking about being successful at things.
Yep.
Right? Success and failure is a completely different conversation.
Not at all what we're talking about. We're talking about effort.
Yeah. The process, how you get there. What are you doing? If you don't do those things and you talk a lot, people's going to hear you less.
That's right. It'll work in the opposite direction from what you want it to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
End up wasting your time.
No doubt. We got time for one more? What's that? Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely.
You got more?
Well, I was going to say, if you're not doing the right things and you're not doing it well, kind of wasting your time anyway.
Yeah, that's true. That's truth. So number 3, our third and final one for tonight. Our third and final way to be a great teammate. And that is choose to be humble and hungry.
Yeah.
Choose to be both humble and hungry. That was, humility was one of those traits that George Boiardi had in high school and in college that all of his teammates talked about, when they mentioned him. In fact, John Gordon said, John Gordon wrote an entire book, The Hard Hat, about George Boiardi's life. And in it, he said that George would have been mortified to think that a book was written about him. That just the very idea that someone wrote an entire book about him would have been really embarrassing to him. And that's just because he didn't do the things that he did to get the recognition. He was very humble, yet he was hungry. I mean, and that's a powerful combination. Those two things are.
It is.
Because
they're polarizing, kind of.
Right.
Right. They're kind of opposites.
Yeah, it's right. It's exactly right.
Yeah, I think this is. If I was building an athlete, I would want to instill in them. The first thing that I would want to instill in them, based on everything that I've kind of learned over the years, the first thing that I would want to instill in them is that regardless of what happens to you today, find out a way you can use it to make yourself better tomorrow. And in the idea of being humble and hungry, as an athlete, as a person, a coach, whatever role you play, whatever title you have, whatever job you have, you're going to have days where you're successful and you're going to have days where you're not successful.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth of the matter is when John says stay humble and stay hungry, is the trick is you respond to both of those results, success and failure. You respond in very similar ways. You don't let that success get you too high, and you don't let the failure get you too low, because the failure is that drives the hunger, right?
Right.
For successful people, it will. For
Right.
successful people, they'll see that failure and they'll want to do better.
Yeah.
It'll anger them and drive them and energize them, and to push them to be better. And then at the same time, for successful people that fight, that are having success, if they rest on that success and say, hey, yeah, I'm good, I'm doing well, I'm successful, on today I'm successful, boy, that makes it really, really hard to be successful tomorrow.
Right. Was it Lou Holtz that said, if what you did yesterday still looks good to you today, you haven't done anything today?
Absolutely.
Forget about yesterday, man.
That's good.
What are you doing today?
Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's true both ways, right? That's true both ways.
Yeah, right. Failures and success.
Whether there's a good day or it's a bad day.
Exactly right.
And we talk about that with, because that's a response mechanism. How are you going to respond to the situation and the circumstance that you find yourself in? But, I know John says, in all the studies that he's done and everything that he knows, these two words, being hungry and humble, are they're two of the most related words to a successful person.
Yeah.
Humble and hungry.
Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah, here's the way it works. One of the things that I remember telling my high school athletes that I coached, I said, guys, in the age of social media, it's really easy to get on there and be tempted to want to talk about yourself.
That's true.
And I mean, you see everybody doing it. And one of the things that I said to them was this, is look, when you're great, you don't have to talk about yourself because others will talk about you. The people who talk about themselves are usually the people who are they're wanting to be great, but they're not doing the work to be great. They're just they're talking about, and that's where we get the word cocky, right? You hate when these people talk about themselves. It's like, dude, just get out there and just shut up and do the work, right? But that's one of the things that George's teammates talked about him very often. They're like, man, he kind of deflected. People would talk about him and he would deflect it. He'd be like, he would sort of, he would put it off and mention more, things, regarding his teammates and, how well, my teammates did this and that's why I was able to, to succeed or whatever. And, it's like, hey, this guy was an incredible athlete, but he never wanted to embrace any talk about himself. And that's the thing is, when you're really great, people will talk about you. You don't have to talk about yourself. People will talk about you.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely something that's come out of my mouth before, but I think what I've learned is greatness really, it doesn't come in that result. And people tie greatness to that result so much. And it's a fallacy because greatness is in the process.
Right.
So someone that's great, they're not even thinking about their success and failures. They're thinking about what they're going to do next. They're thinking about, what's in the future. What's the next goal? Where do I need to go? Where am I going?
That's the hungry.
Keeps them, right?
That's the hungry.
Absolutely right. It correlates. Yeah, for sure. And that keeps them from even having a reason to talk about, what they just accomplished. Because in that moment, if they do that, now, of course, we're not saying don't celebrate. We're not saying don't feel good about a championship or, a big win or a PR or something like that. The only thing we're saying is limit that focus or limit the time and the amount of effort you spend on saying things that bring you into the light that you would like yourself to be brought into.
Right.
Because like you said, that's kind of artificial when you're doing it on your own. Great people are identified by others.
Yeah.
Right. But that greatness is generated long before the result ever happens.
Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah, so when you're someone who is humble and hungry, then that means you are someone who focuses on the process. You'll love what the process produces in you, and that's sort of the idea. And as you just get better every single day, and you're hungry to strive to the next goal, that there's no limit for you. The more you do that, the greater you become, the more people talk about you, and the more you'll be like, you know what, I'm not even realizing that people are talking about. I don't really care. That's not your focus
because it's not a goal.
Yeah,
right?
That's not the goal.
That doesn't mean anything.
That's not the goal. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, and it's applicable too because here's the bottom line: sports will humble you.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how good you are, how great you are.
Right.
You will be humbled. If you play a sport long enough, you will be humbled. It's not a choice. And if you are humble, if that's your approach, then you're able to deal with those situations a whole lot better. It makes you a better athlete than what you could have been, or a better coach than what you could have been because you were humble. Because being humble allows you to deal with those situations where you're already humble.
Yeah,
right?
No doubt.
And then in the same note, if you're not always striving for that next rung of the ladder, you're not getting any better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's as simple as that. So if you're not hungry, there's other people out there that are. They're probably going to catch you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, they're probably going to catch you. So I know that a lot of times that happens with youth athletes that are bigger and stronger, more mature at a younger age than other people, because the game, whatever game that they play that they're good at, that they like, comes so easy to them. Success comes so easy to them. They don't recognize the process. They don't know how to work. And then when the physical features that they have begin to everyone else begins to catch up with them, they realize that, hey, I don't really know how to play this game that I've dominated for years. I don't know how to win anymore. I don't know how to be good. And for some athletes, they can't overcome it.
Right. That's
they just
true.
can't.
That's true.
It's too tall of a wall.
Yeah, that's a great point. So if you're an athlete, if you're a parent of an athlete that is pretty naturally good, naturally physically stronger than others, and that describes your son or your daughter, then find ways to keep them keep them hungry, and of course to keep them humble, because it's huge. It's a huge way to be a great teammate. Both of those things have to go together. They have to go together, and
that's a good point. All right.
Yeah.
It's got to be balance there, right?
That's right.
Part of doing it's part of doing the right things the right way, doing the right things well.
That's right.
Got to have balance. If there's no balance, then whatever takes the other, for sure.
Yeah. So you think we're going to make it through these 21 ways? There's 3.
7 weeks. Not in December. We might have to pop out 3 or 4.
Oh, we can handle
5
that.
at a time.
Yeah, we can handle that. We can crank out 4 or 5 at a time, I think. That's no problem at all.
Our listeners probably believe in us. They know we can ramble.
They believe in us. Yes. Well,
here's the thing. As we're going through these, if anyone out there listening, wants to begin a conversation and ask us to dig deeper into any of these, or give any more specific examples, what exactly were you talking about? What were you meaning? Can you tell me how that relates to volleyball, or can you tell me how that relates to baseball or something like that? Reach out to us and let us know, and we'll try to do that. Some of these things may sound a little vague to some people that hasn't thought about them a lot, So
tell me how that relates to nursing. Tell me how that relates to being a school teacher. Yeah. Tell me how it relates to working in a factory. Yeah, right. I mean, because it is. It's the same thing for everything, We're all part of a team.
Yes.
I mean, regardless of what job you have, you're part of a team, and these things are going to be relevant to you as well as they are to your kids. And whether you're a coach as a coach, they're going to be extremely relevant to you as well. And so I look forward to this. I look forward to continuing this conversation for the next 5 weeks or so, 6 weeks, 7 weeks.
Yeah, me too, Coach.
Whatever it is.
We'll get her done. We'll get her done.
We'll get her done. That's right. Get her done. There's a phrase I haven't heard in a long time. The other night we were flipping through the channels and we saw Medea's Christmas. The Tyler Perry movies. Medea's Christmas was on, and who shows up in that movie? The old Larry the Cable Guy. Yes.
Does it?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know that I've seen that movie.
It's
you see weird
it's
movies,
not Oscar worthy. But there's a lot of those kinds of actors. They improvise a lot. You can tell they're improvising. It's not a script. They're just letting it rip. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. The things we do during Christmas season is just
right.
Crazy. Sometimes.
The sacrifices we make. Yeah, it's a fun season. I love it. Merry Christmas, everybody.
All right, man. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Take her easy.